I think that might be the needed bridge between like the old way of reasoning and the new way of reasoning, where you can see that maybe even a bunch of the stuff that the ancients were doing, you could actually really explain mathematically what it is. You just need to use a different type of mathematics that you were used to.
All right. Welcome back to the Internet of AI podcast. I'm your host. I go by Ethan on the interwebs, and today we have a very special guest. But before we get into today's special guest, allow me to define what HyperCycle is for those of you who may not know. HyperCycle is an infrastructure that enables AI systems to communicate, coordinate, collaborate peer to peer, no intermediary necessary. Now, with that said, let us get into today's special guest. He's coming to us today from Cogency. He has a background in debate and political philosophy, among many other things. That is Martin Rezny. Martin, how are you?
Good. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Let's jump right into it, Martin. Given your background in like formal rhetoric and everything that you've gone through in this journey, like how do you find yourself integrating into the AI space like more and more over time?
It's interesting for me because I really didn't set out to be a technologist, especially not years back. Debating is a lived practice where you go to debating competitions, and eventually I was also hosting them, including
Uh-huh.
international debating tournaments. So it's more about the event or experience of it. But personally, I was also doing a lot of research into the rhetoric itself, but also other ancient arts. That could include anything from even some spiritual or religious things, but also things like astrology, numerology, that kind of stuff, but also ancient philosophies, all kinds of
Mhm.
things. So as I was doing essentially this kind of cognitive archaeology kind of thing, I over the years I started noticing that there are some things in the ancient arts that are or almost look like computer science. That there are
Ah,
some things that really do connect, especially in the fields which do have like elaborate numerical or geometric things going on, like numerology or astrology. But
mhm.
even the rhetoric itself, like if you're actually a practicing debater, if you want to be good at debating, I think you are doing a lot of modeling in your mind that is
Right.
quite comparable to what an artificial intelligence requires to be able to communicate at all. And it was about the point where the large language models appeared that I really started noticing some similarities because
Mhm.
I kept hearing about how they are opaque, those models, and
Right.
mysterious, and nobody really understands how they're doing what they're doing. And I was noticing all of these similarities in the ways in which the LLM is communicating to me and forming arguments and doing those sorts of things. I started recognizing a lot of similarities with how some of the ancient practices are telling you to do things. That there's some similarity between there that generally falls into the category that's called informal logic. And
Uh-huh.
informal logic, as such, is something that, in my experience, I've noticed engineers don't really tend to be familiar with. It's
Ah,
when you talk about reasoning for engineers, it's always formal logic, it's always sort of logical expressions, it's sort of deductive reasoning, these kinds of things. And it's never really about things like maybe at most people would know logical fallacies, but
right.
logical fallacies as such are an informal logic thing. You can't fully formally explain them in something like mathematics.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's everybody recognizes that these things are important and are
Mhm.
important for good reasoning and is the best way of doing that kind of thing, but
Right.
there is no
They hadn't
mathematical process.
integrated it into the AI space yet.
Yeah, so eventually the large language models, I think, were so surprising because they started exhibiting some of these faculties that fall into the category of informal logic. And I think or assume what happened was that since large language models or neural networks, they were modeled on the human brain in some capacity. I
Hmm.
think there are just some structural similarities, and
Right.
that's why it's doing the things. And so, you, as the engineer making the LLM, you don't actually need to understand really the logic that it's doing. You just build a thing that's kind of like the brain, so it kind of does the things like the
It's
brain does them.
emulating it. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think if you look into it, you can see that the informal logic, I believe, actually can be formalized. I think now that we understand that LLMs, you can inspect the LLM and see what the neural network is doing.
Yep.
I think that might be the needed bridge between like the old way of reasoning and the new way of reasoning, where you can see that maybe even a bunch of the stuff that the engines were doing, you could actually really explain mathematically what it is. You just need to use a different type of mathematics that you were used to.
Right. So when you talk about inspecting, that just kind of tethers my mind towards governance. Now, how can humans govern AI given that it can think faster and soon better than we do? Like, how will we be able to govern a situation like that?
That's for possibly for a pretty lengthy explanation, because at Cogency and essentially me and my friends and some other related engineers and thinkers, we've been stealthily developing a whole bunch of ideas about this that
Hmm.
we are now trying to turn into engineering solutions. So we do definitely believe you can do it. It's just it takes a while to explain it to people, because the way we arrived at it is from a different direction than
Okay.
anybody else was working on the
Okay.
problem. So we have to sort of build a little bit of the like foundation of where we're coming from. And ultimately, I think there is a new kind of logic or math that you can develop that would actually represent what reasoning is. Like people keep talking about reasoning a lot in relationship to AI, and how it's, like you said, better
Hmm.
than what we are doing. But it's sort of it's a little bit of a I'm joking a little bit, but it's a bit of a trigger for me, because there are standards for determining what is better reasoning than some other
Right.
reasoning, and that's called debate adjudication. There is a
Hmm.
whole methodology of how that is supposed to do, and I assure you that nobody in the engineering of the AI systems has done anything with that in
Right.
relation to those. So there is a way to determine which reasoning is better, or ways to of beginning to
Hmm.
determine it. And for that purpose, it doesn't matter whether the reasoning is faster or slower. It's about, I think, representing accurately the reasoning that took place, and
Hmm.
then comparing the reasoning that took place, analyzing that, and then you can determine or compare which one is better. So the AIs would always be faster,
Hmm.
but they're not necessarily better at the
Uh,
reasoning in qualitative dimensions that matter.
yeah, and when you're speaking about the AIs are not necessarily better, are you speaking on today's AIs or are you talking about the super AIs of the future? Because I guess what my question is getting at is that AI is this exponentially progressing technology. And at some point, it should stand to reason that it would pass us in reasoning for all puns intended.
Yeah, that's the part where it takes a little bit to explain where we're coming from,
Yeah.
because there is a whole explanation to how this should play out. The
Okay.
simple way of putting it is, I don't think this particular architecture that we're using,
Hmm.
even if you supercharge it, is
Got it.
going to be able to do everything that we can do, because I
Right.
think there are things that it has deficiencies that are representable in things like semantic geometry.
Hmm.
There's a group of scientists who are looking into how to improve AI, and their angle of attack is geometric structures inside of the model
Right.
itself, so that it's not so-called flat geometry
Right.
of the model.
Right.
And that's a most quantitative way of explaining what is better reasoning. For example, a kind of a geometry that's relatively simple, that is not currently part of the existing models, would be something like a loop. That's the kind of thing that theoretical physicists keep talking about, whether it's like
Hmm. Hmm.
strings or loops, like that
Hmm.
level of geometry.
Right.
And if the semantics are expressed as geometry in the current LLMs, then the geometry has a deficiency with the loops, for example, that it doesn't understand structurally that some contexts or some concepts loop around and sort of return to their original value. It's not baked
Hmm.
in into how it's trained to understand it. So
Right.
there are a class of problems for which the current architecture is very good at solving them,
Right.
which don't require things that are especially topological transformation, like taking a geometry and flipping it around.
Right.
They can't really do it at all or very well at the
Right.
moment.
Looking
You
at it
could
from
have a
different,
different
yeah.
architecture of AI that is built to have these geometric structures built in, which then I believe would be far better at replicating these kinds of specific kinds of feats of intellect, that of
Got it.
creativity that human beings can do. So on a long enough timeline, I think we can get there. I am
Yes.
just pretty sure it would take a lot of very specific work that we're trying to work on to get there, that's presently not being done too much.
Got it. Got it. And with your approach or other approaches, do you think that like governing AI would basically turn into, let's say a government wants to govern AI, like, do you think that the government would have to become somewhat AI itself? Like, so for example, back in April, the UAE announced that within 2 years, 50% of their government will be AI. Do you think that AI needs to be leveraged in governing AI essentially?
To answer the question of governance, our approach would be I think you should begin by using these tools to
Mhm.
augment the human capacity to govern themselves and deliberate. So, the
Right.
primary tool that we want to develop to enhance the ability of people to govern themselves or AI systems that are advanced or sophisticated
Hmm.
is that you allow them to deliberate effectively at scale. And you can use AI in some capacity to help that scaling or help the efficiency of that process. Because AI, if you even in the non-generative capacity, is
Hmm.
pretty good at things like very good at like transcriptions, translations,
Right.
summarizing, those kinds of things.
Right.
And if you can automate those parts, then you can scale up human deliberation process a lot more. It would be more
Right.
efficient,
It's an
faster, easier.
amplifier, yeah, of human,
Yeah,
yeah.
it
Mhm.
amplified. So step one is amplified human capacity and
Yep.
create something that I actually call intellective. You have a group of people who are connected through such a system or platform that is enhancing or augmenting their capacity to
Mhm.
deliberate at scale. And that intellective, I think you could begin to measure what the level of effective, let's say, intelligence of it is, like ability
Mhm.
to do intellectual work, which you can then start to begin to compare to AI networks or AI systems.
Right.
So I think you can eventually have large groups of people who together would be smart enough or have the enough capacity to do something like a governance even of a sophisticated AI system. So that's part of it. But then beyond that, it's also about how by doing that, you generate a lot of data about reasoning and value systems and all of these
Correct.
considerations important in governance that would actually allow you to train AI systems that understand that better and then can use things that people deliberated and scale those in governing the AI systems. Like
Right.
the AI that actually understood what people meant can then be governing the AIs at the speed of AIs. So I
Right.
think the root of it all is augmenting people at governance first.
So when I hear augmenting people and having these collective networks that deliberate and everything, the technology that pops in my mind that's the amplifier of this is BCI technology, brain computer interface technology. Such as like Neuralinks, right, or kernel and these types. Do you think that that would be, because again, I just keep coming back to the speed issue. It's like once we have RSI, which is recursive self-improvement, an AI that can just keep recursively improving itself, and you have humans over here on our biological bandwidth just deliberating at human speed, right, where these machines are exponentially speeding up and improving themselves. It's like, how do we deliberate, in a timely fashion? So yeah, I think the BCI technology would probably help us mitigate some of that speed issue.
It could, although it has a lot of potential problems in the category of political philosophy in terms of autonomy, or even what does it even mean to be a human being. Like those kinds of
Right.
things are, I think, important considerations because our philosophy is more humanist than it is transhumanist. Like we
Uh-huh.
want to try to capture the humanities and augment the capacity, the humanities or humane capacities
Right.
to their maximum without changing what human experiences or who human beings are. With that said, I think there's an important consideration here. Not everything is about speed of thinking.
Hmm.
If you try to do deliberation, especially about governance, it doesn't matter that you thought of something in a fraction of a second.
Right.
You can't outpace the speed of reality. You can quickly formulate, you can use the AI especially to quickly formulate ideas for the inspiration, thought generation,
Sure.
that kind of stuff. But that wouldn't necessarily change the process, the humane process as such, as it normally needs to unfold, where then you need to take the time to deliberate about it, because as time passes and events happen as you're deliberating, that is informing the deliberation process itself. There's a feedback loop between reality and the process of deliberation itself, that
Hmm.
the events can't happen or arbitrarily quickly in the world if you're doing a governance of any actual society that involves human
Right.
beings. There's a time frame within which you need to
Right.
be able
I
to deliberate.
I think maybe we're operating from slightly different frames here. So in I noticed earlier in the language you used the word tool when referring to AI. But I think the point where I'm coming from is where AI is fully autonomous. It is its own entity and it is recursively self-improving. And in reality, it can be, I mean, it could be a sociopath. I think one of your writings you wrote about a sociopath that has an IQ of 160, and if it reaches an IQ of 200, is it any better? Is it now insane, right? And so if we get that scenario where we have this AI that is a super genius, but it lacks empathy and those things, and it's recursively self-improving, like how do we rein that in? I think that's what I'm getting at. If you're looking at AI through the lens of not just a tool.
Yeah, I if you've looked at my writings, I
Mhm.
am a big fan of the, let's say, Asimovian vision. That
Mhm.
I think there is a third path between the it being gods or it being titans, it being
Right.
the other super intelligent modes of existing for an AI. I think there are good reasons why you would want to have instead what I call an ecology of peers. You would have intelligences that collectively have a lot of intelligence, but are broken down much like humanity itself into individual agents who have something that I think is one of the important disciplines to make that future in any way safe or aligned, which is what I call character engineering. If you then want to have them to be more than tools, I think you need to take that really seriously.
Yes.
Especially then we would be focused most on the issue of alignment, I guess.
Yes.
And
Yep.
what I think would guarantee that sort of keeping like different groups of different intelligent beings keeping each other in check. I think that would be a matter of how you engineer the whole society of them and how you engineer their character constraints. So I think if anybody at any point can always, of course, try to develop a super intelligent titan like that, really
Mhm.
unbound sort of rogue
Right.
AI. But I think it will be obviously shown in the future when something, or if something like this happens, it will be borne out like in the events what's actually better or worse. It's all hypothesis right now.
Mhm.
But I think there's something to be argued for the distributed, decentralized
Right.
network of agents who therefore have a very diverse difference between their individual perspectives and angles to try to attack the problem. I think
Absolutely.
the any singular super intelligence might have a deficiency in perspective,
Right.
and that
Right.
strategically could be its downfall in that. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree that I think the ecology of AI is a safer approach than having the Titan, right? Um, you know, uh, but also within this ecology of AIs, right? What's stopping AIs from forming cartels, like agent cartels within this ecology, right? It's just like humans, right? We have, division of labor and all of this distributed intelligence amongst humanity, but there are certain bands of humans that, they stick together to for nefarious means. Even within that ecology of AI, we still have to deal with these nefarious factions that could form.
yes, and that's how you deal with that. Would be probably then if you do the model where the AIs essentially character-wise have
Yep.
similar constraints as human beings,
Yep.
which includes their ability to do something that we would call bad or evil from a selfish sort of point of view.
Sure.
If they have this capacity and it's a very equal situation, then it would be politics. You would just have regular politics where there would be nations of the AI agents or cartels, like you say, or different organizations with different interests. And then the whole point of having that decentralized deliberation at scale platform is that you would create a way of resolving not just conflicts necessarily, but let's say tensions, resolving tensions between different groups dynamically at scale. So the technology itself should allow the ability to not have to use violence or force or oppression to be able to deal with anything that any faction considers to be a problem. With that said, if you lean into the character engineering enough, however, I believe there are ways in which if you manage to be able to have that math and the geometry or the grammar of the semantic structures, you could craft personalities to much like it was in Asimovian stories. you could have limitations that are qualitative semantic limitations in nature, meaning that you could create something that would be more so like an angel than a human, if you want
Right.
to classify it in general categories. So
Right.
another approach would be if you wanted to allow them less freedom and lean more heavily into control or heavily into security or safety aspect. I think the same approach that allows you to control it in any way allows you to put some limitations on something like maybe let's never do a criminal cartel. That would be
Yeah.
the kind of thing that essentially would craft as a directive. But that itself, the decision of how to craft the limitations for this new class of beings, essentially, that
Hmm.
itself would have to be a thing that is deliberated at scale
Yes.
in a decentralized fashion first. So it's not for me necessarily or our group to decide that forever. That would be the dictatorial centralized approach. I think it's just generally beneficial to have the tools of develop tools for being able to constrain personality of an AI if we need to. I think that's
Right.
an important technology to develop.
Wow. Wow. And you said it's something that you guys are working on at Cogency, right?
We at first want to
Uh,
create it's a bit of a plan in steps, but we really try to think a long term ahead with
yeah.
how these things could evolve and interact with other technologies, like what HyperCycle is doing or Mosaic directory,
Yeah.
like
Sure.
those kinds of efforts. I think those are quite complementary, especially in the early stage. And so the
Yep.
early stage is the augmentation of human capacity without necessarily producing fully independent agents. So the first stage is giving that deliberation at scale technology, really fine-tuning that, using that to learn a lot about human cognition and human personality, and to make it so that we gain the understanding of intelligence and personality that's sufficient for us then to be able to, if we try to actually engineer the constraints of AI character or AI politics or anything like that, that we would actually be able to do it. So the first step is, I think, the necessary step that you have to begin with. After that, what this produces, like the quality of the data and the insights and what you learn, that will over time begin to determine what or to what extent you can try to do the next steps, which
Right.
again, the ultimate vision would be something like if you want to simplify it for people, Asimovian ecology of peers from our
Right.
point of view.
Right. Yeah, and there's a couple points you touched on. I really want to touch on. One was when you mentioned again human augmentation. You reminded me of your earlier comment about the transhumanists versus remaining, I guess, naturally human for all intents and purposes. And I'm wondering, like, where do you draw the line for one? And then two, when you talk about deliberating while character engineering certain AIs, you may be able to do that within a particular organization or a particular national boundary, but maybe a rival faction, whether that's an organization or nation, they may want to accelerate. There's game theory there, right? Because wherever you try to slow down and take your time and ensure quality, they may want to speed up just in the name of trying to get an advantage. And how do you mitigate that? So I guess it's like two things I would love to touch on.
Yeah, so as for the boundary between human and transhuman, I think in the earlier discussion when I also was on a panel with Tufi, we had a bit of a clash about this as well. When I mentioned there was without actually at that moment really knowing fully what Tufi's stances are, so I wasn't like
Right.
directly addressing that. But in retrospect, I think I should clarify. I used the term some of the like more extreme forms of transhumanism. I think transhumanism as such, as an idea that life forms evolve, stuff evolves over time in the universe.
Sure.
I'm not personally not necessarily against some version of sort of symbiotic evolution, let's say,
Right.
on the very long term scales. I don't
Well, you
necessarily
have you
think
have
that.
glasses, right? So that's part of the
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
already some degree of
right,
augmentation, yes.
right,
So it's not that there isn't as it is with most things, there isn't a completely clear distinct dividing
right,
line. That's just not how
right,
philosophy works.
right.
What I'm definitely against is when it becomes more extreme, and the more extreme forms are either that you intend to remove people or you really don't care about people. I think that's like one of the
Hmm.
lines that we wouldn't want to cross. I think who people are, what they want from their life, like essentially self-determination and freedom of
Hmm.
choice, those kinds of things, I think are non-negotiable. Meaning that if there was a group of people who decide freely and willingly to do something like the brain chips or the other form of like interfacing with
Sure.
machines. I think it would still, of course, be politics, meaning that some people wouldn't like it for different reasons, and
Of
there would be
course.
debates and argument and potentially clashes or conflicts about that. Might be inevitable eventually, but I think the important line not to cross is that freedom of self-determination line. Like as long as whatever anybody's doing is allowing everybody else to decide things, including to decide to just remain a human being and maybe just have a computer. As long as that is an option that's allowed for people, and there isn't a group that tries to forcibly prevent or stop or remake everybody else, that might be a kind of evolution that I would be personally okay with. So that's the first question. The second question was about you were asking
It was
about
the national boundaries. It was
the
about
competition.
the
Yeah,
game theory of
game
competition. Yeah,
theory. Yeah,
exactly.
I think personally, there's more to it than just the intelligence, even to a game theoretic point. To that, I actually do believe that if you take a little bit more time to do it better in important qualitative dimensions, then you create AI that actually will be superior in things like imagination or creativity, which are very important for strategic purposes like defeating an opponent in any kind of conflict. It's sort
Right.
of the lack of imagination is what gets you there. So if somebody really rushes with what I would call inferior architecture to just increase its IQ, I think, and it would be particularly if it would be personally uncontrolled, if the character wouldn't be engineered, meaning that you don't know what it's going to do. I think that's just a
Mhm.
thing that will bite whoever's trying to do it, and they will sort of suffer the consequences of that. And I think that what you just need to make sure of is that somebody is trying to do it right also
Mhm.
as fast as it can be done, and
Mhm.
then see how things play out. Because I don't think a world is better in which nobody is trying to do it right, meaning
Yeah.
try to develop safe technology. Because I think
Sure.
eventually, if we manage to develop protocols that work, like the way of doing it that is demonstrably safe, then from that point on, it would likely be adopted. It would be irrational not to adopt the eventually proven technology that allows you actual control, because even people who are trying to win by defeating everybody else, they still would prefer if their AI wasn't at any point aimed against them or would
Sure.
harm them. So it's
Right.
still something that everybody would want. So I just think it's important to develop that capacity as quickly as possible, regardless of what anybody else is trying to do.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to like how conscientious is all the players on the board. And also it comes down to the stakes that are on the line. So, for example, in a previous interview, I interviewed Dr. Ben Goertzel from SingularityNet, and he's all about decentralized AI. And in the past, he had said that what OpenAI is doing with ChatGPT is basically parlor tricks, right? Now, I don't think anybody today would want to use GPT-2. GPT-2 now at this point in time is not a very good product. But because they had first movers advantage, they just shipped. It wasn't perfect. They just shipped. So they gained a lot of ground, and that then becomes a gravity well. They get they've got the user base, they got mind share, right? And it just keeps compounding on itself. Where somebody like Dr. Goertzel may be taking a more qualitative approach, but he's losing a lot of ground to this company that just ships. And I think in this scenario, it's okay because he can come from behind and win eventually with a higher quality product and a more thought out product. But when the stakes are nations completely destroying other nations, I'm not sure if we could stand to lose that much ground.
Well, let me put it this way. I think there's a lot to it's an ancient parable of the tortoise and the hare. Like
There
the
you go.
slower one may actually, who's doing it right, may actually win out in the end. So I wouldn't necessarily really underestimate that game theoretical strategy of that. I think
Yep.
it's important that somebody tries it. It's, I think, worse if nobody tries it
Yes, I agree.
in terms of like for the chances of humanity in the future. So we're just, stubbornly going to try to do the slower but qualitatively better thing anyway, and see how that happens. We're quite fine with the odds, personally. But in addition to that, there is a reasoning why it would work this way, And I think that's a lot of with the economics of it. The people who are doing the sprint don't really have a good economic model. They don't really have good products that generate enough revenue, so they are burning debt, like trillions and trillions of debt. And there's every chance that before they can actually get to anything that definitively fully works on that trajectory as like the ultimate weapon of defeating everybody, that they can even get there before the whole thing implodes. I think what we're working on, which would be at the beginning purposely more in terms of IQ, more limited intelligences, would be something, however, that would immediately begin to generate products that actually would generate revenue, because it would be all focused on creating things that a person would need in their life and want to pay money for. So I think there would be also a strategy of how to, because you're doing it differently, gain more traction and have a reason why the tortoise would be on the long term, on the sort of long axis of the whole competition, would have a leg up. So in this sense, if we use the AI in a limited capacity in ways that it actually helps people, which begins with the simple things like again, translation, transcription, summarizing, like these kinds of things. You can have a very simple, lightweight model running locally on a device that can do that function. Imagine, for example, let's just do a universal translator, the thing in Star Trek. That could be a very lightweight model that does just that single purpose. Like you can do products like that people, I think, would want and pay money for. And so there would be an economic model that I think would sustain that development. I think what is the important thing to consider in this competition is if it's looking like the people who are doing the sprint for the like ultimate Skynet or something like that,
right?
If it's looking like they will be able to get past the finish line in time. And to me right now, it looks like their architecture is fundamentally flawed, and that's why I don't think they will actually get it to a point where it will be controllable enough for anybody to be able to do what they would want to do with it, including the nefarious thing. So I'm really betting on the tortoise here.
Yeah. Okay. No, I get it. You made a really good argument for this. So, so in this scenario of like, say, a mature ecology of AIs, like, what is the place of humanity? Are you arguing that are we owners? Are we governors, protected participants, or just simply ancestors?
I kind of like the ancestors angle a little bit, like Tufi says, parents. I think there is something to that. I like the humane organic metaphors. Usually, I think there's a lot of meaning or wisdom in thinking about it in that way. I think you shouldn't be thinking about them as instruments only, or just your slaves and stuff like that, because that then will, I think, have negative effects bouncing back at the human culture if you try to develop technology that way. So there's, I think, something to that. But the word I choose in my writings is peers. I think eventually, if you really model essentially an Asimovian robot, a thing that has a human compatible personality, including in terms of its complexity and internal dynamics, that you can model, if it's compatible or superior in terms of IQ, so it's at least as intelligent as a human being or more so, then it would be something like Data from Star Trek. So again, it would actually, if you get to a point where it is the robots from science fiction that all people love and would like to be able to interact with, or droids from Star Wars, at least. Right. If you get to that point, then at some point you need to start treating them like they are other organisms, like the other that coexist with you
with rights and everything.
At that point, and at that point, I think if you wanted to think in terms of utility, like actual usefulness for things like work or effectiveness of resource use and stuff like that, I think you can then also make argument for human beings. I think human brains, compared to any existing electronics, are actually very ecological computers. They use comparatively insanely small amounts of energy to do these complex calculations. And it would take a lot of technological revolutions to get our hardware to be exactly as efficient. I think the difference in just sheer efficiency of compute between human brains and our machines is like a order of billion or something different.
Yeah, it's like 2 or 12 billion or something. I heard the number.
Yeah. So I think in the future, you would want to be spending the resources you have to do the fast supercharged compute very strategically. You would have that for things that really need to be done quickly. But for most of the things, you would want to have people do it just because it's just saving a lot on the overall energy. Even if you want it to be completely utilitarian about it, which is not the perspective that we that we prioritize. If we have whatever sort of diverse viewpoint in the future, I think there will be a lot of place for people if you create the systems that actually would integrate them properly with whatever technology we decide to implement.
Right. I'm gonna see if I can get you to basically illustrate the value proposition of cogency, right? If you could parse through a cogency session, or how does the deliberation process play out, could you illustrate that for our viewers?
Okay, so currently the first prototype or versions of the software that we're working on that eventually could have many different forms and uses is focusing on the aspect of the using minimum amount of extra systems or compute to maximally scale up the ability of like how many people you can put in a room virtually who could converse or discuss or debate or deliberate, whatever format you want to use, with each other, so that all of the participants can still have the access in real time to the best things that are being talked about in that discussion or deliberation, and that they can keep track of the complexity of the situation of what's going on. So you're giving people tools to be able to, instead of the classical maximum of maybe a couple hundred people in a huge town hall who meet in a physical location, maybe you at least get it to where thousands of people can effectively do the same, which would be on a scale of most corporations, like larger or mid-level to larger corporations. Because I worked for over 5 years at Red Hat, which is the world's largest open source company, who wrote a whole philosophical book about how it's good to have the employees or people at the company communicate with each other so that you don't lose the good ideas. So it's even what I'm working on right now. It's not that it's completely original thought that it would be a nice thing to have. It's just, it didn't, this sort of thought and approach that I think served Red Hat pretty well, even if they just essentially used email chains for that. If you actually had a dedicated technology that really maximizes this, that's what we would want the first iteration of our software to be. And then you can use it not just at corporations. The scaling effect would be beneficial for any group that wants to do better governance. Meaning it could be a literal government, some sort of political grouping, or it could be NGO, or it could be anybody else. We really want to have a thing where there would be some version of it that to some extent would be freely accessible to everybody. Because really our sort of mission is to be able to give a tool to all of the people in the world to do some better deliberation with. But of course, there needs to be a business model. And the business model, I think, also not quite unlike business models like of something like open source companies like Red Hat, as a software as a service thing where you don't necessarily have to pay for like a CD with the software or anything. But if you want to have a custom solution made and for you and sustained serviced for you, then that's the kind of thing that the company, for example, would pay us for. And as for the customization, we do have a whole system that we're already developing. We would essentially have an editor, which would be modular. It's a thing that I developed that I call modular rhetorical logic, where you can take components of communication events and you could arrange those components however you want. So that would be a proposition compared to existing platforms, because some people have told us, we had like a quick glimpse of what we're working on. It's like, oh, it's just like Reddit or something. But it's different from the existing social media platforms, all of them, in that the people who made the social media platform, they design it, they design how the communication system works in there, and you have to either like use it or go away, go do something else. We have one tool where you can characterize with those modules. You can characterize all of the logical possibilities of what can happen in a communication event and have a user-friendly editor in which you can arrange that however simply or complexly you like. And at that point, the sort of stage 2 value of that is once people start using it at scale, we try to engineer it so that the system can produce a form of data from what's been going on in these deliberations that will actually not flatten the structure of the reasoning that took place. It wouldn't be just strings of text that were set for some sort of statistical content analysis, but you would have a specialized data format that would contain the actual chains of reasoning. For example, the way how debate adjudicators are actually threading and noting when they're doing the adjudication, the argument. So you won't just get sentiments, you really will get argument data. And I think that would be a really valuable training data for those higher level AIs that would actually be able to not just pretend that they reason, but inspectably, verifiably do particular forms of reasoning.
Yeah, and I think that's the key word is verify. I feel like human history, much of our economy and interactions have operated on trust. And I think that the new emerging economy, the machine economy, if you will, is going to operate on verification. So I think that's going to be big. Um, if you had to play out the Internet of AI in its full maturity, um, ideally, how would you like for this ecology of AIs or Internet of AIs to look?
I can't necessarily speak about certain aspects of it, like the how to distribute the compute, some of the more hardware technical elements, because I am
Mhm.
not an engineer personally. I'm
Right.
a logician and
Mhm.
more of a philosopher. So
Right.
the aspect of it that I like to look at is more the communications aspect, let's say, because I
Okay.
think the it is the one of the big challenges of that system that I think should be designed in a particular way is how you would have those like what I call intellectives, which could actually be either of AIs or of human beings, or a combination of AIs and human beings. You have
Hmm.
a combination of intelligences that are
Right.
engaged in some sort of communication protocol that has the purpose of deliberation, which roughly is some form of talking things through to solve a problem or come up with ideas to do some
Right.
intellectual work with it. So
Right.
you can have these things set up. So I think there should be one I think on if not open source, then on at least like open access protocol which everybody could be using, where there would be that modular element where people could be designing this in a decentralized fashion,
Hmm.
their communication networks or their communication situations within whatever group or subgroup or for whatever purpose. But there would be that unifying protocol which would be able to make sure that whatever anybody is doing anywhere is translatable into some sort of data or mathematical representation that everybody else will understand. I
Right.
think in the direction of as everybody's doing their things, that overall you'll be producing better and better models. And I was actually thinking about politically what it means to have a society that's decentralized and works quite a bit more very recently. And I think, as far as anybody has gotten so far, it's a lot of talk about consensus that you need to somehow achieve
Right.
consensus. But I think that's still too much of a averaging utilitarian thinking. I
Right.
think it's not so much about, because if you do it this way, then you focus on eliminating conflict.
Hmm.
And I think if you eliminate conflict, then you are crippling any true representation of what people want. I think it's more about the keyword is tension. Is you are trying to create a system in which you can have harmonious and disharmonious elements, to borrow ancient language,
Right.
which are held in a particular dynamic tension, which you could all represent in this world with those mathematical models, essentially. So you can say it's like I have like a new saying: truth isn't relative; it's relativistic. It would
Hmm.
be essentially semantics as relativistic physics, literally.
Right.
So
Right.
it wouldn't be that like anybody can just say whatever and anything. It's what you're saying is from a particular perspective, and the perspective can be correlated or can be coordinated or measured against other perspectives, which all exist in one model. So you have this world in which the more people are doing these communications, the more you're essentially doing science about how to govern everybody better.
Right.
And the ultimate metaphor is that you're doing actually some form of orchestration. It's more the way to think about it is more musical. That
Right.
it's like in a good piece of music, you have the harmonious things and the disharmonious things, but if you arrange them right, as like the time unfolds and as they interact with each other, the result can actually be quite satisfactory and beautiful and have these like aesthetic qualities. So I think that's the true future of politics is that kind of stuff. It might sound a bit too I'm not sure what word to use right now. It feels like magical thinking or something like that, maybe at the
Hmm.
moment. But I promise you that we've done a lot of thinking about how you actually get there
Uh,
with math and geometry and engineering. And I think it's
wow.
just one of the things that the ancients have observed correctly, but didn't have the sophisticated technology
Right.
to
To
take
implement.
out of the human brain and turn
Right.
into systems.
Right. Right. Wow. Well, Martin, this has been amazing, and hopefully we get to do this again in the future. For anybody at home that wants to know more about what you're doing personally or what Cogency is doing, do you have links or social media websites that they can look into?
The one place you can look into is cogency.org. That's cogency with an S. Our website. You can either at the moment sign up for a public test that we're planning at sometime in August if you're interested in trying what we have out. But also you can go from there to the about section of our website and read about what we're trying to do in a more technical language than I have managed to present it during this interview.
No worries. Yeah, thank you again, Martin. I really appreciate it. And again, hopefully we get to do this again in the future.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you.